The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod in a water depth of 13,000 feet.
7,600 square miles, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. These search efforts have focused on both surface and subsurface. That operation is currently ongoing. This is an incredibly complex search operation. Sometimes we don't find what we're looking for. We offer our most heartfelt thoughts and prayers for the 5 crew members, their families, and their loved ones.
An international search and rescue team is scouring the ocean for any sign of the missing submersible on a voyage to the Titanic.
After 48 hours lost at the bottom of the ocean, will the mini-sub meet the same fate as the wreckage it was looking for?
It's a story that captivated the world when 5 men dive to the wreck of the Titanic and go missing somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. The scale of the search to find them is unprecedented.
Canadian Coast Guard, French authorities, you had American Coast Guard, ships, airplanes. It was frantic.
As the whole world watches, it's a race against time.
They only have so much life support on board, and the oxygen is running out.
Air Force sonar recordings gave the world hope.
And I identified banging noises that appeared to be man-made. That's when the search really changed direction.
The vital audio revealed here for the first time.
We need to have hope, right? We're searching where the noises are, and that's all we can do at this point.
But what actually went wrong? And how many safety warnings were ignored?
We've taken a completely new approach to the sub design, and it's all run with this game controller and these touch screens.
By the self-confessed rule breaker at the helm.
He seemed to think that he knew more than the regulators, so who were they to regulate him?
We all need pioneers. Ego is not a bad thing. It's a great driver, but it also can be a killer.
And what is the truth behind this extraordinary tale?
All sorts of things started to come out, fingers started to be pointed. Everyone has a theory on what happened. Very few people know the answers.
April the 10th, 1912. The most famous ship ever built set sail from Southampton to New York. The Titanic. 5 days later, it was 2.5 miles at the bottom of the ocean. More than 1,500 people lost their lives after the 269-meter-long ship struck an iceberg. Now, more than a century on, it's a story that has captured the imagination of millions. Since the discovery of the wreck in 1985, most who have dived down to it have been salvage hunters and scientists. But it has been an obsession for explorers too.
It's the Titanic. People are fascinated by the Titanic. People are just transfixed by this shipwreck and visiting it. It's just this lure. It's the most famous shipwreck in the world.
The allure of Titanic is the romance of the story, added to the fact that it's so remotely positioned 2 miles at the bottom of the ocean. So few people are able to see it.
In 2009, a company called OceanGate was founded. Its aim? To take paying tourists to the Titanic in a deep-sea submersible.
I think there was a market gap, market need, desire, passion, drive for opportunity to dive the wreck, and OceanGate saw that opportunity. And I suspect that the lure and the excitement of the opportunity probably masked the risk of what potentially lay in store.
That ship's lying at the bottom of the ocean, not because of the nature of its steel or the nature of its compartments, but just because of bad seamanship. The captain was warned, there were icebergs ahead, it was a moonless night, and he plowed ahead for whatever reason. I think there was some greed, there was some glory in it, and here we are again, and at the same place.
Newfoundland and Labrador, it's a small province. It's Canada's youngest province. There are only about 500,000 people here.
Being close to the Titanic, expeditions that go to the Titanic tend to leave from St. John's. So we had heard about OceanGate in the years previous and their plans to take a manned submersible down to the Titanic.
On Friday, the 16th of June, 2023, a ship called the Polar Prince sets out from St. John's, Newfoundland. Its destination? The site of the Titanic wreck, 400 miles southeast in the Atlantic Ocean. Towing behind it is Titan, a 6.7-meter-long deep-water submersible.
One of my colleagues was hiking Signal Hill looking over the harbor and had taken some photos of the Polar Prince going out through the harbor in St. John's out onto the open ocean, and you could see the submersible being towed behind it.
By towing the Titan submersible behind them, it was being subjected to far more action in terms of vibration, impact, and exposure than it would have been if it was put aboard a tender and secured deckside.
There are 5 people preparing to dive 2.5 miles down. Hamish Harding, a British billionaire who runs a Dubai-based private jet dealership.
Hamish was a very amiable guy, very nice guy, fiercely intellectual, thought deeply about everything, but saw excitement in almost everything around him.
Also on board is 48-year-old businessman Shahzada Dawood from one of Pakistan's richest families, and his son Suleiman, who is just 19 years old. Their guide is 77-year-old former French Navy commander Paul-Henri Nargelet.
Paul-Henri Nargelet was a larger-than-life character. He was a very, very fun guy and extremely good at what he did, which was diving submersibles, diving Titanic, which he did 37 times.
Each of the deep-sea tourists has paid nearly £200,000 to OceanGate for the trip. The CEO of the company will be piloting Titan for the dive. His name is Stockton Rush.
We had spoken with Stockton Rush on the St. John's Morning Show a few weeks prior, and he had come on to just kind of set up the season, to let us know about some of the expeditions that they had coming up.
The last 2 years, we've gone out in more the July and August timeframe. But in fact, the sea states out at the site are actually, can be calmest in May and June, just a little colder out there. And I've always wanted to, see the icebergs, or maybe even have the fortunate chance to dive next to one. So with the Polar Prince and its ice capability, we thought, let's move the mission a little earlier this year.
I met Stockton Rush in 2016. He did have a big personality. He had the personality that you would attribute to an explorer.
We specifically designed the submersible for this mission. What could go wrong?
By 4 a.m., the Polar Prince is at the site of the Titanic, but the conditions at sea are too dangerous to dive.
We had a really remarkable spring weather-wise. We had a lot of heavy fog, and so I think the fog that morning had delayed them a little bit.
You're possibly getting anxious because of the delay, frustrated. You just want to get into that submersible and get on with the dive. I became aware of Hamish Harding's post on Instagram. He said, due to the worst winter in Newfoundland in 40 years, this mission is likely to be the first and only manned mission to the Titanic in 2023.
According to OceanGate's crew waiver, Titan has made fewer than 90 dives, but only 13 to a depth as far down as Titanic. Several others encountered delays, including one documented by a film crew in 2022. Candid footage captured Stockton Rush briefing passengers.
We want everyone going into this fully informed. This is an experimental sub. This is a dangerous environment. Very few people have been down there. And so we want to make sure that you're going in with an open eye and you understand what's going on. If you don't want to do it at any time, feel free to say, hey, I want to take a pass, and we can work something out.
June 18th, 2023, just before 8 a.m. The passengers are happy to make the dive. They've all signed a waiver that mentions death 4 times on the first page. They board Titan. Once locked in, they cannot get out.
One of the things that really struck me was that you're bolted into the submersible. You get in, and then they close the hatch and bolted shut from the outside.
Being bolted into a submarine is a huge safety issue. That alone, frankly, would scare the bejesus out of me.
Once you sit in that submersible, all the electrics have been done, all the topside crew have done preparation and checks and double checks and gone through their checklist and get in again. You're committed.
Then the hatch is shut, and then the realization dawns, this is happening, and it's a bit late to turn back now.
In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 5 men are about to take the trip of a lifetime. They are bolted inside the unregulated, experimental deep-sea submersible, Titan, and they're preparing to dive to the wreck of the Titanic.
It's just such a unique experience, such a once-in-a-lifetime venture. Great adventures come great risks, but sometimes you have to take those risks.
Titanic is 2.5 miles down. It's a dangerous environment. At that depth, pressure increases dramatically. The enormous weight of the Atlantic Ocean above, crushing down onto the submersible.
Down there, you're talking 350 or 400 atmospheres of pressure outside versus 1 atmosphere pressure inside.
If you even got a pinprick hole in the submersible, the pressure of the water coming through that hole would be like a laser that would cut a man in half.
So why would anyone take such extraordinary risks? Those who've been there say it's life-changing.
Touch down on the seabed, it's like a lunar landscape, just colorless sand. And then suddenly, within a meter of my face, the other side of the porthole, was the bow rail of Titanic. Just breathtaking.
Stockton Rush claims Titan has been to the Titanic on 10 previous dives. It captured these haunting pictures from the deep. Arthur Leubel is one of only a handful of Titan passengers to see Titanic firsthand.
After 2 or 3 hours now, we reached the place where the Titanic is. What we saw of the Titanic, one of the first was the famous bow. That was amazing. Everybody was happy. The mood was very good in the ship. Also, Stockton Rush was very happy. PH was our guide. He was telling us everything about the Titanic. Every window, what happened, who was his cabin, here was the captain's toilet, here was the captain's bathroom. He gave us really a feeling we are at the Titanic 1912 and walking around the railways and everything. It was amazing what he was telling us.
The portholes are just haunting when you imagine what went on behind those portholes. The rust that is coming off the wreck run down the portholes like tears. It was a once-in-a-lifetime trip. So few people ever get the chance to do that.
The Ocean Gate expedition starts to descend to Titanic at 8 a.m. Titan will explore the wreck for 2 hours before resurfacing at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
It will take around about 2 hours to descend from the sea surface down to around 4,000 meters. You're so sort of excited about the prospect, you're not really thinking about the claustrophobia. You're certainly not thinking about the likelihood of anything going wrong at that point. There are various environmental zones that you will pass through on your way down to a depth of about 4,000 meters. The first zone is what we call the photic zone. Everything becomes very blue.
Extraordinary, beautiful colors you experience as the water changes, and you have change of different temperatures, currents, eddies. You then start to see some sea life.
Then you enter into what we call the twilight zone, which is a depth of around 200 meters to 1,000 meters depth.
It gets dark. It gets pitch black after probably about the first hour and a bit.
The pilot turns off the lights and you're in pitch black. Can't even see each other. Maybe the odd red light on some of the controls.
It's very still, it's very dark, it's incredibly quiet. It is very peaceful.
It's extremely quiet, and it's very, very eerie.
The next stage of the journey is the moment the Titanic comes into view. But not for the Titan.
At 9:45 a.m. on 18th of June, suddenly communication with Titan is lost. Those aboard the Polar Prince would have been checking everything that they could to re-establish communication.
The speculation at that time was why, what happened. The frustration of the topside crew would have been extraordinary. Something is clearly very wrong. How are we going to resolve this problem?
I'm not sure that they would immediately assume something disastrous had happened. They would want to rule out all sorts of other causes.
There's an expectation as a deep sea researcher that anything you put over the side of the boat into the ocean can fail in some way, and often electrical systems will fail. That's the most likely thing. They've had some kind of power failure. Maybe they're taking time to get their backup system operational. Once they do, they'll be okay.
This wasn't totally out of the ordinary. We know that in past missions they had lost communications as well. They knew that communicating with the submersible at that depth was difficult.
Those in the know have speculated about Titan's actions at this point. Filmmaker and deep-sea explorer James Cameron made this shocking revelation in an interview with ABC News.
It's our belief, we understand from inside the community, that they had dropped their ascent weights and they were coming up trying to manage an emergency.
I have heard some talk about the possibility that they knew that something was wrong, that perhaps their detection system had alerted to some kind of failure in the hull, and that they were attempting to resurface. If that's true, that will have been very distressful, particularly for the passengers.
The focus of both Stockton and PH would have been trying to gain some control of the submersible, trying to recover some height and getting the vessel stable and back to surface. And that would have been their total, utter focus. The fear that would generate, I can't even comprehend. The last little while, I think, would have been absolutely torturous.
Meanwhile, the US Navy's enemy submarine detection systems pick something up deep in the ocean.
Navy had heard a noise on the day that Titan lost communications.
The US Navy at the time would have said, yeah, I think we've recognized something that is vaguely what we would expect from something like Titan having some sort of incident. We've got to analyze it, we've got to make sure.
Back on the surface, there is an anxious wait for those aboard the Polar Prince, which includes some family members of the Titan's crew.
You can imagine you're 685 kilometers out on the Atlantic Ocean, lose communications with the submersible, the panic that would have set in on board the Polar Prince at the time.
The person that I identified most strongly with through all of this was Christine Darwood, who's the mother of Suleiman Darwood, who was on the support vessel, the Polar Prince, when she heard that all communication had broken down. She had given up her place in the submersible so that her son could have the experience of going down and seeing the Titanic. And suddenly this, and you imagine this hellish nightmare scenario.
Time ticks by.
Five hours later, 3 p.m., the Titan failed to come back to the surface as it was scheduled to. Bearing in mind that they'd lost contact, you would think alarm bells were ringing when there was still no sign of Titan at the surface when it was meant to be there.
Worse still, the submersible only contains limited life support, and it's been slowly running out since the hatch was bolted shut.
They were equipped with about 96 hours of oxygen on board the Titan, and at that point the clock had been ticking for some time.
It would have been absolutely freezing, it would have been dark, they would have been running out of oxygen. So we knew the situation that these people were in wasn't going to be good.
At 5:25 p.m. Eastern Time, the crew of the Polar Prince alerts authorities. Nearly 8 hours after losing communication with the Titan.
There was a gap of 8 hours before the mothership contacted shore authorities to let them know that there was an issue and a problem. Emergency services like the Coast Guard, they would want every hour, every minute to be able to come up with a plan in order to effect a rescue.
But finally, a rescue mission is about to begin.
It was a rescue operation. As far as we knew, he was missing. And could it be found in time before the oxygen ran out?
We knew then that this was going to be a massive, massive, massive search effort.
It was going to be a monumental effort, and the people down in that submersible would fully be aware of that and fear the worst.
You don't give in until the very last moment. Never, ever give in. It's a sports thing, it's an expedition thing. You just never give in. If there's 1% chance that people can be rescued, you go for it. You've got to put your resources into doing that and try and rescue them.
400 miles off the coast of Canada, 5 men were on what should have been the trip of a lifetime, diving to the wreck of the Titanic. But communication has now been lost for 8 hours, and their oxygen is thought to be running out.
Knowing the dangers, I was fearful it was not going to end well, because I can't imagine the terror that they would be going to at the bottom of the ocean.
At 5:25 p.m., the first distress call goes out. The Canadian Air Force answers.
I'm Major Don McCauley, and I'm a search and rescue helicopter pilot. I can proudly say I've been part of the Royal Canadian Air Force for 18 years. We were the first point of contact from the Polar Prince. I was listening in to the call, and I feel like my face probably was a little bit in shock, you know, kind of in like a, whoa, this is intense, right?
The Canadian Air Force is being called in to carry out surface searches, flying over the ocean to spot any sign of Titan. They will deploy a specialist aircraft, the CP-140 Aurora.
The CP-140 Aurora is the long-range patroller. They are the main asset for Canada's Air Force when it comes to intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And they have a sensor suite that's conducive to anti-submarine warfare. So essentially, use those capabilities to find a commercial sub in this case. They're a sub hunter.
It's a huge task, and time is slipping away.
It's a scary, scary situation to put yourself into and to imagine. You know, some people would prefer not to imagine it, but I think from a compassionate search and rescue perspective, it's important for us to put ourselves in that situation, and you're hopeful. You want to bring those people back to their families. That's what's driving you, that's what's motivating you.
But searching from the air has its limitations.
Our search and rescue expertise kind of stops at the surface. It's not part of our mandate. We have nothing written in manuals to search underwater.
If Titan is at the bottom of the ocean, the only way to reach it is with another deep-sea submersible. But there are only 10 in the world capable of diving to those depths. And the closest one is nearly 2,000 miles away.
My name is Jesse Doran. I'm the ROV manager here at Pelagic Research Services. I manage the subsea equipment that we have. On Sunday, June 18th, I got a call from one of my colleagues that started the whole thing rolling here. He told me he was working with OceanGate and they had a manned submersible in the water that they'd lost contact with, and they were approaching the time when the submersible should have returned to the surface automatically in an aborted mission type scenario. Our capability is to go down to 6,000 meters, so we were well suited to get down to the depths where Titanic lies and effect a search and rescue if needed.
This is the Odysseus 6,000 meter vehicle. This is a remotely operated vehicle. The vehicle itself, the Odysseus 6K, is equipped with a variety of cameras looking in a variety of directions to give the pilot a sense of place and space. But before you can see something visually, we can also see something through acoustics, and we bring a sonar down. This vehicle is rated to go to 6,000 meters, and that means everything on the vehicle can withstand that kind of pressure. We were called immediately after the Coast Guard was contacted. It was the opportunity to rescue the crew of Titan. And now our plan was go to seafloor, locate Titan, start bringing Titan to the surface. But the planning process typically to go on an operation like this takes weeks or months. We had days. We were hyper-focused on rescue from the moment we got the call, and that's when our clock started. But really, the clock that we were under was, of course, when the hatch was closed on Titan.
If they are at the bottom of the ocean, the Titan crew face an agonizing wait while rescue teams mobilize. And the next morning, the news reaches the mainland for the first time.
People were starting to come in at around 9 a.m. when we got a phone call to the newsroom. A reporter had asked us if we knew anything about a submersible that had gone missing off the coast of St. John's, and immediately we knew that this had to be Titan.
The story is about to explode internationally.
It was absolutely wild to see the world's media descend on St. John's.
A deep-sea submersible used to take people to view the wreck of the Titanic has gone missing in the Atlantic Ocean.
Trapped in a tiny submarine far beneath the ocean surface with time and oxygen running out.
There was a global media feeding frenzy. There was something in this story to appeal to everybody, didn't matter where you lived, anywhere in the world.
The tourist sub that's vanished thousands of metres below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean.
Titanic का मलबा दिखाने के लिए जाने वाली लापता.
Dieses Boot, die Titan, gelten die 5 Abenteurer als verschollen.
It was one of those things that just grabbed everybody's attention, and we all became obsessed with, is there a chance they're going to get out alive?
For the Coast Guard and the Navy, it is a race against the clock. Oxygen levels inside it are dropping.
It was an international story that was breaking and developing quickly right in our backyard. The Coast Guard headquarters is like right down the street from the Globe offices. This particular story stood out from really all the other stories I've covered. Such a compelling story on so many different levels. You have an experimental submersible with tourists going down to visit the wreck. You had the time component, you know, that 96-hour window, and everybody was counting down. The world was watching.
Everywhere was reporting on it. There was a massive interest in the whole rescue operation. That something's missing whilst diving down there immediately makes it of interest to the public. You throw in, oh, it's tourists going down there. And then it's thrown in, oh, it's billionaire tourists going down there. It was absolutely guaranteed, really, to be at the forefront of all of the news.
Now, the price for this trip is extremely high-end, £195,000 per person.
That was one of the things that really caught a lot of people's interest early on, was when they saw the price tag. $250,000 per person is enormous, and it's something that's out of reach for 99.9% of people. That turned heads.
As the story began to unfold, more and more information came in about the resources available to try and find the submersible and then to recover the submersible if it was still down there.
The search might have been the only thing more frantic than the news coverage.
On Monday morning, the Canadian Air Force launches the CP-140 Aurora.
We were actually the first crew to go out on that Monday morning. The crew was 13 people for that particular mission. My role in that was the communicator, to speak from the aircraft to our tasking authority to let them know how the mission was progressing.
I'm at the ops desk in a room just like this one. A lot of what we do is we're making phone calls to task the aircraft, to coordinate what the tasking is, where they want to be, making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page.
We actually flew for about 11 hours on our sortie. That is time to get to the scene of action, and then six and a half hours actually conducting our search, and then obviously we have to come home. When we were coming home, there was another aeroplane that had been made ready, had a crew, they were briefed, and they came out to replace us. We're given a search area to start with and saying this is where we believe the object to be. Over time, because of ocean currents and the winds, that area will get bigger and bigger and bigger.
As well as searching the expanding surface area, Captain Thomas and his crew are also listening under the water by using state-of-the-art equipment.
Sonobuoys that we drop from the aircraft basically listen to noise in the water. Sound in the water travels further and faster than it does in the air. So using those facilities from the sonobuoys, we will put them into the water to see what is unusual. It's things that perhaps shouldn't normally be there in the water. Then we will try and figure out where the source of that noise is. We would then report that to the Boston Coast Guard, because they were the main people who were driving and coordinating the search activities.
We just wanted to give them everything we had to help out, because I think we recognized the scale of the situation.
By late afternoon, the world heard from the man in charge of the search effort.
The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod in a water depth of roughly 13,000 feet. We are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board. We've coordinated with the Canadian Coast Guard and Canadian Armed Forces to deploy additional assets to the scene.
It seemed like there was like this collective hope. For as long as the Coast Guard said it was a search and rescue mission, there was that hope.
You had Canadian Coast Guard, you had American Coast Guard, you had any equipment that might have been helpful anywhere on the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Were we focused on rescue? The answer is absolutely. And not only were we focused on rescue, the entire international response was focused on rescue.
With the world now watching and an international search effort getting underway both above and below the sea, there is a belief Titan will be found in time.
We had the time in which the oxygen ran out on the board in our ops room, so we were very, very aware of when this search was going to end.
Titan has been missing for more than 24 hours. At least 5 planes and a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker are searching for it, with more ships on the way.
What we're really focused on is locating the vessel, which could either be in the surface or subsurface. And so we're bringing in technical expertise to understand the dynamics of underwater search and underwater rescue operations.
One of the first phone calls that I had made was to a man named Mizel Joe, who owns the Polar Prince. So I knew that he would be in the know. And so I spoke with him and he said, the fog is really thick out there. They're hoping that they surfaced and we just can't find them. There's some hope that they did make it to the surface, but they're just out of sight. They're lost somewhere in the fog.
If Titan did resurface, a rescue is still not straightforward. The surface search is more than 7,500 square miles, an area roughly the size of Wales. And with comms lost, the crew would have no way of letting anyone know where they are.
One of the most worrying things about Titan was it was secured by these 15 very heavy bolts. So even if you got to the surface, you couldn't actually get out of it. So there was a chance that you could run out of air even though you were on the surface.
My concern was that you'd have people freezing to death because of the conditions. You're not insulated and you're suffocating at the surface.
They would have no way to get out. They would be trapped in there. Immediately your brain goes to a very claustrophobic place, I think.
I thought this was a situation where you had people that could look out that window, see the air, see the surf, and still be suffocating, waiting for rescue.
For the search for Titan, because it's in the water, you don't know whether it could be floating on the surface or it could, well, still be under the water.
Making many people question which would be worse, lost on the surface or lost on the sea floor.
The sea is unforgiving. It is cold, underwater, it is dark. There are so many challenges.
My heart really went out to these people, not just the families, the people in that situation. It's incredibly cramped.
If you picture yourself in a tube-shaped vessel the size of a minivan, cramped together with 4 other people in the dark water, the situation is like the stuff of nightmares.
It's not just confinement to contend with. Temperatures that deep down can dip to 2.5 degrees.
it would have likely have started to get very, very cold. I'm told they had some kind of heating system, but they probably would have had to shut that down if they needed to conserve energy. There would have been condensation. It would have been very dark. It's an awful situation to be in. And as soon as panic sets in, you're in an enclosed space. I'm sure it would have been particularly horrific.
There is hope, you know, that lives can be rescued. But if they were underwater, that would be extremely difficult to pull off a rescue.
That's all part of what made this story so interesting and so captivating for people. It's one part adventure and one part horror.
If Titan is on the sea floor, their hopes may rest with one specialist team. And they are racing against time to reach Titan before the oxygen runs out. But they are 2,000 miles away and need help getting there.
We were at the airport 0400 and the loading began. The Air Force was sending heavy lift aircraft to the Buffalo International Airport. And that was a result of actually Ocean Gate contacting the Air Force. The kit is about 30 tons of equipment. 3 Air Force C-17s gave us a ride. We would not have been there in time if it wasn't for them.
We had to get there as fast as possible because there were people in trouble and their oxygen resources are limited, and we knew that. That was definitely in the back of our mind all the time, the minutes ticking by, and we were doing everything we could to make the next step go as smoothly as possible.
The first aircraft departed early to mid-morning on the 20th.
I got on the first plane with a couple of my colleagues, and the rest of the stuff and the rest of the folks were going to follow.
With the assistance of the US Air Force, the Odysseus crew are now on the way. But it will still take them a day and a half to reach the Titan dive site. As time wears on, hope is beginning to fade. Titan has now been missing for more than 60 hours.
In Newfoundland and Labrador, we cover a fair amount of nautical disasters, and we know that when contact is lost that far out, it usually doesn't end well.
On top of the sea, people don't survive, but down below, in frigid, deep, dark water, your odds of survival are even slimmer.
But then, an extraordinary development.
Late in day 2, CNN reports that the Canadians have heard banging noises at 30-minute intervals from under the ocean, and that changed everything.
This is the sound that was heard.
Sounds like it could be somebody knocking. The symmetry between those knockings is very unusual. It's rhythmic, it's like somebody is making that sound. And the fact that it's repeated is really unusual.
The reports of banging quickly spread. Could the sounds mean a rescue is possible?
Maybe the banging sounds were coming from the Titan.
So people were like, oh my God, they're still alive.
Next time, the sonar audio intensifies the hunt for Titan.
That's when the search really changed direction, bringing industry and bringing militaries and bringing countries together to try and save these people.
And experts reveal the shocking truth behind Titan's design flaws that Stockton Rush was warned about.
They put people at risk who had no idea what risk they were taking. You just don't get chances when you go that deep.